Hi everyone, this is Natalie with Champion of Coins Tarot. I hope that you all are doing very well today. I wanted to come on to talk about my own experience with ancestral work. What it is, some of the resources that have been particularly helpful for me while undergoing this journey, and to share some of the tarot decks and oracle decks that have really been influential in helping me to be able to integrate this practice into my daily life. So for those of you who don't know, ancestral work is about honoring the ancestors who have come before you. This can include a variety of practices, and it can also involve a variety of ancestors. You can look at the ancestors within your own family lineage, but you can also look at spiritual ancestors. So the artists, the mystics, or the political figures who have really paved the way for you in your own practice. Ancestral work is going to look a little bit different for everybody, depending on your own circumstances, depending on your own culture of origin. However, it largely encompasses the combination of doing genealogical research, so learning about who your ancestors are, where they lived, what kind of experiences they went through while they were here on Earth, preserving some of the traditions that have been passed down through your family and culture of origin, and then also a devotional spiritual practice. And that can look like either directly communicating with the spirits of your ancestors through prayer or by using a medium such as tarot, which is what I do, and also engaging in actions that can heal generational patterns of trauma and abuse that your family line has suffered, and really breaking those cycles and reaching a place of liberation so that way you are best positioned to become an ancestor yourself. So ancestral work has come very strongly into public consciousness over the last several years, and I think that there are two reasons for this. The first is the long overdue recognition of Black and Indigenous people and their contributions, specifically to American society, but also on the global stage. We've seen a lot of decolonization efforts in academia. There's just been a resurgence of people who are returning to the practices of their culture of origin. I'm thinking particularly of like the rise of African traditional religions in the United States, and several prominent authors and speakers who are bringing their own culture's perspective on ancestral work to a larger audience. And then we've also at the same time seen a destigmatization of mental health and a greater focus on epigenetic research. So that's looking at how trauma can physically impact the body and affect the physical and mental traits that one generation passes from one to another. I'm thinking specifically in this case of a study that was done on Holocaust survivors, and it was shown that there were different mental illnesses and different physical illnesses that the Holocaust survivors themselves did not have, but that their descendants, their children, and their grandchildren did have. So we're having this larger, complex societal conversation around mental health, around recovering lost history, about returning folks who were traditionally marginalized in the historical record to the front and center of our understanding about the world. And all of that is incredibly important. I want to say that for myself personally, I have long had an experience with spirit communication. So really my tarot and my spirit communication practice have gone hand in hand with one another over the last 9 years. However, for some personal reasons, I felt more comfortable working with the spirits of loved ones who were not my blood relatives for guidance and wisdom. And that has really changed for me because I am getting older, because I live far away from my family, because I'm realizing that I am closer to becoming an ancestor than I am to my own childhood. The way that I'm thinking about the world, the questions that I'm asking about myself, And this desire to be able to reconnect with my ancestral lineage has just been such a strong theme. And over the last few months, I have carved out the time, the dedication that I have needed, really the discipline that I've needed to bring into my spiritual workings in order to begin to forge these connections. Also, as well, my sister and I have been engaged in our own family genealogical project for the better part of 2 years now, and we've been able to identify thousands of direct blood ancestors. And I do want to acknowledge here how privileged I am in that regard, because I'm a white woman. My family of origin is Christian. I'm the only member of my family who is Jewish. And I don't want to give too much away about my personal life, but I have ancestors who settled the Jamestown colony and who settled the Quebec colony. And so by virtue of their involvement in these major historical events, I have access to a plethora of historical records that not a lot of other people are going to be able to have. And I think that's a really true tragedy, because if you are Black and you're descended from enslaved persons, you're likely not going to be able to have any records of your family before they came to America forcibly. Same thing if you're Indigenous, you're likely not going to have records before your ancestors were moved onto reservations or to boarding schools. My partner's family is Jewish and they're descended from Holocaust survivors, and they had to go all the way to Germany in order to even begin searching for records of his family, because so much was lost during the Holocaust. So it isn't impossible to be able to get these records. There are a lot of really wonderful online genealogical resources that I'm going to link down below. These are free open source projects. One of them is Afrogenius, and that's specifically for helping folks who are trying to find records on enslaved ancestors. And then also the Jewish Genealogical Project is really great, and that has the most comprehensive database for Jewish ancestors out there. So I will leave those linked below. It's also, we're seeing a rise in DNA testing, and those can actually be very, very helpful for folks who are in those circumstances where you don't have those physical records, because the technology is so advanced now that it can pinpoint within several hundred miles of where your oldest living ancestors were, and you can be able to track their migration patterns throughout history by using your own DNA. And so that is a really great place to give you a nexus point of research to learn more about the general history, the general culture that your family originated from. I do also want to just have a note that although I think it's incredibly important to learn from history, because those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, I think that there are two extremes when it comes to the discourse around ancestral work right now in this contemporary space. On the one hand, you have folks who try to glorify, and when I say folks, particularly other white people, who try to glorify their European ancestors and who think that they are more superior than other groups by virtue of their racial heritage. I think that that is absolutely abhorrent. I think that that is a recycling of Nazi rhetoric and has absolutely no place in public discourse. So I very strongly condemn that. And yet, on the other hand, you also have folks who say that white people shouldn't engage in ancestral work because of the abuses and the injustices that white people have had through colonization, through the genocide of indigenous peoples, and so forth. And so I don't think that we should glorify our ancestors. I think that we need to reckon with difficult legacies that we have in our past. I know I certainly have very difficult legacies in my own past where I know ancestors who have harmed other people. I know ancestors that have contributed to white supremacy culture. And I don't think that we need to glorify, I don't think that we need to sugarcoat that. But at the same time, all of us are living in this world. All of us need to understand who we are, where we came from. We need to understand the people that made us, so that way we are best equipped to be able to make the kind of progressive change that we want to see in the world, to be able to advocate for those around us who are in need of help, who are in need of greater societal support. I really think that by grappling with those shadows in our ancestral lineage, we can heal ourselves personally, but we can also work towards solving these collective issues and, again, making the world that we want to see for our own descendants someday. And also, you know, our ancestors are human. They're just like us. I know I'm not a perfect person. I know that they certainly were not perfect people. And so even amongst the bad, I think that there are still some family stories. I think there are still some traditions that are not tied to that can be very helpful in terms of offering inspiration, guidance, and loving support as we move through our own challenges in this life. So that's really, really big disclaimer, but really at the end of the day, I do think it's so important to learn from history, both the good and the bad, and to be able to face this head on. One book that has really been particularly transformative in that regard for me is Ancestral Tarot by Nancy Hendrickson. So Nancy is a professional genealogist herself, as well as a lifelong tarot reader, and she writes in a very accessible, beginner-friendly style. She offers plenty of tips, techniques, and resources for both doing genealogical work and then taking that knowledge, taking some of the questions that you've uncovered in your research, and then bringing that to your tarot practice to reach out to those ancestors in spirit for answers and also for general guidance. And she divides the book into 3 different categories of ancestors. So there are ancestors of blood, who are your own family lineage. That's primarily what I have been working with. And then towards the end of the book, we have ancestors of place. So looking more generally at the older ancestors, the more ancient ancestors that inhabited your region of origin, looking at land spirits, traveling, being able to connect with specific locations. And then she also includes a chapter on ancestors of time. And this is the one place where I have not actually engaged in any exercises in this book, because it's focused on past life and reincarnation and connecting with ancestors that you might have had in previous lifetimes. For me personally, I entertain reincarnation as a possibility, but it's not part of my spiritual worldview, and that is not my intention when engaging in ancestral work. I'm really, really focused on healing patterns within my own family line, so that way, again, I can become a future ancestor. That's really the gist of this for me. But that being said, I do think that there is just a lot of really great information. She provides additional genealogical resources for you, different websites, both free and paid, where you can access these records. She goes into, I'm trying to find some, here we go, tips for designing your own spreads, as well as just offering so many different guided exercises and meditations. She also talks about creating ancestral sigils using tarot cards that have great significance to you. And the one technique that is most important is actually this one right here in the Meet the Family chapter. So this is what I did when I began working with this book. Basically, you sit in meditation and you draw out your family tree, I believe going back 3 or 4 generations, And then you draw a tarot court card that is going to signify each person. And that creates a really beautiful shorthand. It begins to create a shared language. So that way, when you engage directly with your ancestors, you already know which archetype in the tarot each person most closely represents. And then you can use those notes to be able to go further. So, for example, I did this exercise, and my father's family were entirely signified by pentacles and swords, which makes sense. They were farmers. There were also many soldiers in my father's line, and my dad himself was in the US military. And then my mother's family were all cups and wands, and they are all musicians. So I thought that that was really beautiful, and that has served me well. And then from there, what's funny actually, so I initially made contact with one of my ancestors before getting the book and before doing all of these exercises contained therein, and she was represented by the Queen of Swords. And then I did this activity, she was represented by the Queen of Swords again, and then when I sat down to make first official contact, lo and behold, the Queen of Swords was the very first card that fell out of the deck. And so I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, because that had happened 3 times, because I had engaged in that exercise, I felt prepared. I felt ready to recognize her and to bring her into my space. So what that looks like for me is very, very simple. I am a total minimalist when it comes to my spiritual approach, despite, some of the few crystals and prayer beads and things that I have. I sit on the floor, I light a candle, and it's that lighting of the candle, it's that habitual action that delineates mundane space and creates sacred space for me. And so once the candle is lit, I meditate, I center myself. If I have a particular ancestor in mind, I will find the court card that represents them, and then I will go through and either do an exercise in the spread, or I will pick up from what our last conversation was and read intuitively that way. And I've been able to work through all the exercises in this book, and I think it's really, really brilliant. I will say this book is really focused on personal healing, and so that is absolutely important, but it also is a bit of a downside, because in doing this work, there are going to be some ancestors who are very well in spirit. And what I mean by that is they are ancestors who are very happy to connect. They're very happy to reach out. They are going to typically be very talkative. Their energy is going to feel very positive. And then there are other ancestors in spirit who are unwell. And those are the ones who they are still trying to process some of the trauma that either happened to them or that they inflicted on other people. And those ancestors, they're typically going to have a heavier energy. And those are really the ones that I've found that I have had to really spend a lot of time researching and really try to get to know them and to understand their motivations and to be prepared when doing this work to engage in that type of energy. And I think that that is where Ancestral Tarot might fall a little bit short, because it's really focused on building positive relationships, which you should absolutely have with your ancestors. And I do want to clarify that I think overall, my experience has been absolutely beautiful and empowering, and I feel like I know so much more about myself, and I know so much more about my family, and I feel unconditionally loved and supported, even by those spirits who are unwell. But it's really focused about doing the work for you, identifying where your ancestors' influence is positive or negative, and being able to move forward with action steps, as opposed to maybe digging a little bit deeper. And I do have another book that is really devoted to that topic of how do you heal ancestors who are in distress. And that is Ancestral Medicine by Dr. Daniel Thor. Actually, I should have grabbed it when I was making this video, but I'm not done reading with it yet. but that does a much deeper dive where it goes into sitting in meditation. For is an anthropologist, and he studied ancestral lineages in communities predominantly in Africa and in Asia, and their methods for healing, and is very much like a trauma-informed practitioner. And I'm hoping that that book is going to kind of take me to the next step in regards to doing this work. But for an introduction to what ancestor work is, for creating your own personal tarot associations for members of your family, and then offering guided questions to ask them to begin to reach out, this is really indispensable. And I will say that this book does require, and really all of ancestral work does require, a certain suspension of disbelief, because I certainly have had periods in my life where I was very heavily invested in doing spirit work, and I really did feel as if the experiences that I was having were kind of outside of myself. And then I've also had moments of questioning that and doubting that for myself, and wondering if maybe there were other things that were happening and I was just projecting onto that experience. That's not the case with this book. So in doing these exercises, I have been able to uncover information that I didn't even know about. And I thought that I was so prepared going into this because I have all these genealogical records. I know so many of my ancestors' names. I know so much. But doing these spreads and communicating with them directly, they were giving me messages about their lives that I was able to then go back and be able to validate by uncovering further records. So an example of this, I was talking with my third great grandmother. I was doing a tarot spread, and she was showing me her life and different lessons that she had learned. And we were talking about marriage and what support she might offer me as I am thinking about, starting and growing my own family. And I got the sense that there was another person. Like, I knew she had been married for 40 years, but I had the sense that there was a third party in their relationship. And so I immediately went, after closing that session, and did further research, and I was able to locate my third great grandfather's death certificate. And he had remarried 3 months after my third great grandmother died, and it's the second wife that's on the death certificate for him. And like, there is no way that I would have known that. There is no way that I would have thought to find that missing document if the information about the other woman had not been present in the tarot spread. So it's just things like that. And so I encourage you, if you are somebody who is a little bit more skeptical, to give it a try, because you never know what could happen. There's a lot of just great potential and possibility there. So that's my experience working with the book. Now I'm going to show you some of the decks that have been really foundational for me in doing this work. I'm going to start with decks that I used to use back in the day just for general mediumship, and that I have employed in this practice as I felt called to do so, and have been very powerful. So first and foremost, of course, is the Golden Tarot by Liz Dean. This is my oldest tarot deck. I love it to pieces. I know this like the back of my hand. This is a really unconditionally loving energy on its own, but I have definitely been able to channel messages from my deceased loved ones, both friends, and also from my deceased grandmother with this deck. And so it's very beautiful. And I was kind of using this at the beginning of my practice. And then the China Tarot, which is a Los Scarabeo deck, I have used this, and it's upside down. I've used this also for workings with my grandmother, also for general communications over the years, and this has been really powerful. It's a pip deck, but I think that the images are just so absolutely captivating and arresting that it feels very fiery and very alive, and so it's a clear communicator in that way. The Hardy Tarot, which is one of my favorite Thoth decks of all time. And this is really grounded, really beautiful. It can both look at relationship dynamics, but it can also take you to a higher plane, like looking at what the spiritual purpose is of a specific situation. And so for me, I've used this more so over the last couple of days, working with ancestors who are unwell in spirit and really looking at what the lesson is, what information can be understood from their life and their example, and how to move forward in a very grounded and protective way. I also recently got the Southern Botanical Oracle. And of course, you know, again, my father's family, they are from the American South, predominantly the Appalachian region of Virginia. And these are plants that I know intimately. Like, these are the plants of my childhood. I live in the Ozark Mountains of Oklahoma now. And this also reflects that Ozark mountainscape. And so this has also been really, really beautiful for doing that kind of intense shadow work. Same thing with its companion deck, the Southern Gothic Oracle. So if the Southern Botanical Oracle is the landscape, the shared landscape of myself and my ancestors, this deck is the shared culture. And this has also just been so absolutely beautiful to work with. I find that the ancestors will speak directly through the Southern Gothic Oracle, and then the Southern Botanical Oracle is more so for me for kind of doing like aftercare after sessions and being able to integrate the messages to be able to reflect and think more deeply about the conversation that we have just had. And then this last deck is really the bread and butter of my practice. And this is the Etruscan Tarot by Lo Scarabeo. This is a new deck to me, but it is old. I believe that this originally came out in 2003, and it is sadly out of print. But this is the primary mediumship deck right now. And I saved it for last because this deck is so powerful and so emotional. So it is directly inspired by Etruscan artwork. The Etruscans were the civilization that lived in Italy before the rise of the Roman Empire. And this artwork is taken directly from reliefs on Etruscan tombs. I do read reversals with this deck. I tend not to read reversals when I'm reading for myself psychologically, but I do read reversals in spirit communication. Just because I find that it adds an extra layer of importance, gravitas, and emphasis to particular messages that come through from them. But yeah, this is where the real magic is happening. And I love this deck not only because of that connection across time and space, where this artwork was originally created to honor the spirits of the dead, and now I'm using that to honor my own beloved dead, but because this is so wise. It's Rider-Waite-Smith inspired, and so the imagery is simple enough in that regard, it's traditional enough in that regard to be able to really get the message that's needed across, but it's all in the details. There are so many details in this deck that are so personal to me, that feel so resonant to who I am, and that feel so resonant to different episodes in my ancestors' lives, particularly looking at the relationship of war and this pattern of inflicting and receiving trauma, that like it's really, really intense. And the Tower card is my most favorite card in the entire deck, because this to me reminds me of the principle of Tikkun Olam in Judaism. So there's a Kabbalistic tale that when God was creating the universe, God poured out their light into 10 different vessels. And the vessels could not contain the light of God. And so they shattered. And the light and the darkness of the shards were scattered throughout the earth. And it is the job of each individual person, wherever they are, whichever situation they are in, to find the light and to elevate the light. So that way, even though we are all fractured and disunited, we can work towards returning to the unity of consciousness, the unity of love and understanding that is God. And to me, that's what ancestral work is. Ancestral work is sifting through the lightness and the darkness within ourselves, within our family line, sifting through the lightness and the darkness and the stories that we tell to ourselves and to one another, and working towards healing, working towards reparation, working towards returning to love and understanding and compassion. That's what this deck is for me. Like, that is absolutely what this deck embodies. That is what all of the conversations that I have with my ancestors with this deck are about. And that is why ancestral work is such a deep part of my life and why I feel so compelled to share this with all of you. These decks are personal to me. They might not be your cup of tea. I really encourage you, again, to use what you have available. You do not need anything special. You don't even need a tarot deck in order to communicate with your ancestors. You just need to have an open mind and to reach out to them in meditation, in prayer, to go outside and to be in nature, to be in a place where you feel loved and inspired, and to reach out. And if you do want to use tarot to communicate using some of the techniques in this book, using the court card method, or using this intuitive method of pulling cards that I've shared with you, again, I encourage you to use what feels right, to use what is most resonant with you and your family, and to see where that journey takes you. So those are my initial thoughts on ancestral work, on ancestral tarot, and what has been really transformative for me in my practice. Let me know if you also engage in ancestral work. I would absolutely love to hear about what your journey has been, to be able to learn what resources you recommend, because we're constantly learning and growing, and I really want this space to be a micro community where we can reach out to one another, where we can help one another along our journeys. And as always, I am sending you much love as you walk your own path. Bye.